In this video, we'll have a look at 9 practical workflow automations that you can build and make use of right away using Trello and the integrated Butler feature. So these are all automations that you can apply to Trello boards and Trello cards to save yourself time, to automate parts of your workflow, and to generally just make your boards much more efficient and much cleaner to work in. Now, before we dive in, let me just clarify a couple of things that are especially important in case you've seen some other Trello automation tutorials. First of all, this is not a basic how to use Trello type tutorial. I'm not going to be waffling on about the basics of Trello or the basics of this feature. I'll go straight into actually useful workflow automations. If you want a more basic tutorial on how to use Trello to be productive, I have a separate video on that I will link to below. Also, what we're looking at here is the integrated Butler feature in Trello. So a lot of tutorials you can find are about Butler back when it was a separate plugin or a separate add-on that you could apply, and it had a totally different UI. But now this has been integrated and made a native feature by Trello and has a new UI, and that is what we're looking at. With that said, let's get straight into our 9 useful workflow automations. Here's my Trello demo board, and up here we have a Butler button. You can click that to start building automations. And the first one we'll do is I'll go to rules, and we have different types of rules we can create right here. You can create a new rule, and every automation will have a trigger followed by one action or a set of actions. So let's add a new trigger, and let's say when a card is added to a specific list, such as the in list by anyone, usually you want to set that to by anyone so that rules don't only apply to you, but anyone working in the board. Click on the plus to apply that as our trigger. Now we have to define the actions that happen once this trigger fires. So when a card is added to the in list, move the card to the top of the list, same one that it's in, add the plus. This gives us a summary, and when we save, we get basically a text summary of what our new rule does. Okay, so when a card is added to the list in by anyone, move the card to the top of the list. So let's close this and test it out, right? If I go to the bottom of the list, test card, I add a new card, it takes like a second or two, and as you can see, the card jumped to the top of this list. This is the first super simple automation that can be useful for a list like this one where new tasks come in. And by adding this rule, we just by default, we sort the list to show the latest created ones at the top. And then as we go down the list, tasks get older. Next, let's go into recurring tasks. This is the most requested type of automation that I've seen from customers who've used my course and on other Trello tutorial videos that I've done. So anything where you have a recurring set of tasks, where on a specific interval you want the same kind of tasks to come in, the same kind of checklist of steps to come in, this is how to do it. As an example, I'm going to show you how to make a morning routine that recurs every morning. So once again, on our Trello board, the first thing I recommend doing here might seem a bit strange, but you'll see why in a second. I have a card on this board. It doesn't matter what list it's in. I have a card called Checklist Templates. And in here, I build any checklist that I want to reuse on a regular basis. So for example, I have a blog publishing checklist, morning routine, video checklist, and other checklists like that. Now, the reason I have 3 asterisks at the beginning of this name is the following. Whenever you're working in a card, whenever you add a checklist manually, I'll do that right here, you can either create a new checklist or you can copy items from another checklist on this board. And these items to choose from are sorted alphabetically. And so I have the 3 stars here because that will always put it at the top of the list. And that means that when I manually want to add one of my recurring checklists, it's always at the top of the list. So this is what you should create first. Create a checklist templates card and put any checklists that you want on a recurring basis in here. So for this automation with the morning routine, we have the card called Checklist Templates and the list called Morning Routine. So with that, let's head into Butler. And for recurring tasks, we want to have a calendar automation or a calendar command. We create a new command, and here our trigger is going to be either every day, or we can refine that, make it every weekday, and we can also add a specific time. Let's say 6 a.m. So every morning at 6, I'll hit plus to add that as our trigger. Then what do we want to do? We want to add a card called morning routine. And I want to add this in my today list. That's today's tasks, makes sense that it's in that list. And then I want to add a checklist. So here, this checklist item, I want to add a checklist called morning routine from the checklist templates card. So here I enter the exact name of the checklist I want to copy, and here I enter the exact name of the card I want to copy it from. And in addition to that, we can also add other things. So for example, here I can add a label if I want. And so we can have a whole stack of actions happening to this new card that we want to create every day. I'm going to leave it at this, hit the plus to create that and save. And once again, we get this summary. And here's what it looks like. I'm not going to wait until 6 a.m., but here's the one from today. As you can see, it creates this, it labels it, and it gives me my checklist from this card right here. So this is how to create a recurring daily task, and with exactly the same recipe, you can create recurring weekly tasks. So that could be something like maybe a weekly work review every Friday afternoon. It can be a monthly task, a monthly reminder for payroll or anything like that. And this is probably one of the best features in Butler because it can just save so much time and make sure you always get the right tasks at the right time. Moving on, our next automations are about keeping the board clean. So I have this board here where we have a flow, and this is usually how you set up your board. You have a flow that goes from left to right. And we have a list where tasks come in, then we prioritize tasks for this week, for today, and then we have different steps of a process. Now, one of the problems that will happen in Trello is that usually in any given board, more tasks come in that can get completed. And stuff tends to get clogged up. So if you're working on a Trello board, either alone or with a team, what you'll find is over time, the lists keep growing and they get clogged up with more and more cards because stuff is coming in quicker than it's being processed. The more clogged up your boards are, the less productive you tend to be. So how do we fix that? Well, here's how we can use Trello automations to do so. Let's go into Butler again, go into Calendar once again, create a new command. And as a trigger, in this case, let's do every day at sometime in the evening. Let's do 9 p.m. This is our trigger. And what I want to do is I want to move cards as an action. I want to move cards from the list today into the list this week. So I'll save that and we'll go straight into our next automation, which is closely related. So we create another calendar command, add trigger, let's say every Sunday, and I'll make this at, let's say 10 past 9. And here I'll move cards from this week into the in column and save that. So let's look at what we have here. At 9 p.m. every day, we move cards from today to this week. And at 10 past 9 every Friday, we move cards from this week to in. What this means is that we have an automatic cleanup process that moves cards back in the process. So by default, we want to move from left to right as cards get processed. But to clean the board, here's the idea, right? If something is in the today column and it hasn't been done by 9 p.m., it's not going to get done today. So I move it back into this week. And if something is in the this week column of Friday evening, it's not going to get done this week, so I move it back into the in column. The great thing about this is that it keeps my more important lists this week and today clean, plus every day, instead of just taking whatever's left from yesterday, I have to reprioritize. I have to look at my tasks that I want to do this week, and I have to decide which ones will I do today. And again, every week, instead of just working on whatever wasn't finished last week, it forces me to reprioritize. And this is very important because your most effective work isn't always just cleaning up whatever wasn't finished yesterday or last week. We can take this even further, by the way, and you can even move cards to a different board. So, for example, we can create a calendar automation. Let's add another one for once a month. for example, every month on the 1st. And again, I'll make this a bit later, such as 9:15, because I want the other automations to run first. And now I can move cards. Instead of just emptying my entire in column, I can move cards that are older than 30 days in the in column, and I can move them to a different board. So I hit that board icon. I can go to the brain dump demo board. So the brain dump board would basically be my idea board. That's before my process, my work board. And I can put them into uncategorized in the brain dump board. So here again, we have once a month, it will look at cards that have been in that in column for longer than 30 days and move those off of my work board. So those are two ways in which to essentially auto clean and auto process your board. Now, I find that some of the most useful automations are based on the stage or the type of work that needs to be done. So as something moves through the process, it will get to a certain stage, and with that stage, certain tasks, people, and processes will be associated. For example, we might have a writing process for blog content where there's a writer who does the writing. And then once the writing is done, and I'm sure you know this if you've done any blogging or content marketing, there's a bunch of stuff that always needs to be done before a blog post can be published. You have to make sure you have the featured image, assign it to the right category, make sure you have your social sharing images, your SEO title, and so on and so forth. And this is once again a task for a checklist template. So I have an example for this as well, which is the blog post publishing checklist. Let me just copy that name there. And we have a stage. So we would have the ready to publish stage right here, where a writer would put a card once it's ready to publish. So let's make an automation for this. This would be a rule-based automation. So we create a rule. The trigger is that when a card is added to the ready to publish list, again, by anyone, that's our trigger. And then what we want to do is we want to add a checklist. We want to add the checklist called blog post publishing checklist from our checklist templates card. And let's add some other steps to this as well. So let's say there's a specific member on the team who needs to do this. So we can say, add someone we add them to the card as a member of the card. We can even add a comment, add someone, this one is ready for publishing. Let's add that and then save it. So now we have an automation with more steps, but it's all about making sure that when something moves in here, the right person is assigned and the right tasks are assigned. So let's try this out. We have a card here. Actually, let's make a new one, new card. So we have a blank card. We move it into ready to publish. We wait for a second. And here we go. So this adds our checklist, and it doesn't assign or post a comment because this adds someone person I said doesn't exist on the board. So that was just for demonstration purposes. You'd have to choose someone who's actually a member of the board in order for those automations to run. But here you can see the principle of making sure you always have the same checklist with the same tasks. This is super useful as a quality assurance kind of thing. Just like, a pilot uses a checklist before takeoff, or a surgeon uses a checklist before surgery. Like, even experts will do better work and will be more consistent if they can follow the same checklist of procedure each time. Now let's go slightly more advanced on this same idea of assigning a specific person and checklist and so on based on the stage of work. There are some more advanced features in here that can be really useful. So let's create a new rule in Butler. Let's switch on the advanced option here, which gives us further filtering options. So here, let's say when a card comes in to, the ready for publish list. So we want to add another filter criterion. So for example, if the card has the video label and it comes into ready to publish, then I want this automation to run. So let's add this. And then again, we could have a similar thing, right? So again, I have a checklist for this, for example, which is the video checklist. We want to add that. And we could add due dates and all kinds of other things here as well. But the important point here is to make use of the extra filter, which allows you to have different types of work coming through the same stages and followed by different actions. So let's save this and let's try this one out. So I'll create another new card, and this one will assign the video label and then move that in here. And now you'll see that we have the video checklist, but we also have this blog post publishing checklist. And that's because the new rule we created doesn't exclude the first automation from firing. Now, in some cases, maybe that's what you want because it's a video inside a blog post, so you want both of these processes to run. But you can also, again, use the advanced options to make exclusions. So go in here, let's basically fix this if we only want one of these two checklists to appear. So we have this more generic rule that has no filter. Let's edit this automation. And this is something that is somewhat peculiar, is that you can't edit the trigger, you can only delete it altogether. So then we add a new trigger, and we say when a card is added to ready to publish, and we add a filter, and we can say without the video label. So we make an exclusion, it's basically the inverse rule, and once I add this rule, the actions are still there. So it looks like all the actions go away once I delete the trigger, but that's actually not the case. So this is basically how you edit the trigger, is you delete it and add a new one and you don't lose any of the actions. So now we've added a filter to both of these so that only one of the two automations fires depending on whether that label exists or it doesn't exist. So here, as a general note, if you're building more and more automations, you always have to make sure that there are no unintended consequences. This is why I had different start times for my board cleaning automations, because I want to make sure that one automation runs before the other one starts. And you can also mess things up. You can basically make automations that run too often or that run in loops and so on. So you have to be careful about how automations may interact with each other. But having said that, let's get into our next automation, which when set up right can save you tons of time. Let's go into Butler again and make a new rule-based automation where our trigger, so we create a new rule, our trigger is going to be when a card is added to the ready for design list, and then we want to add a checklist. So this is a familiar process. We want to add a checklist from our checklist templates. This is nothing new. So let's save that, but let's go a bit further. Let's create another rule based on checklists. So now I want to go into the second row here and say when the checklist called blog post design checklist is completed in any card. So when this is completed, then I want to move the card to the next stage. So move the card to the top of the list, ready to publish. And this basically gives us automations that lead to further automations. So let's have a look at what this looks like. So let's test this out, right? If I have a demo card here, I put it into ready for design, and the first automation runs, gives me this checklist. Now, we could also have automatically assign the designer, post a comment, all this stuff that I showed before. So someone then comes in on the team and completes the tasks on this checklist. Once all of the tasks are completed, you can see here it was automatically moved to the next stage and the blog post publishing checklist has appeared. So we now have, as soon as this card is completed, what we can do is move it to the next stage, automatically add a new checklist, plus all the other stuff. So you could, in the first automation, assign a certain person, then unassign that person, assign the next person, and so on. And this way you can, based on completion of the process, you can automatically move cards through the board. Now, we've touched on many of the automation features already. Let me show you two more that are kind of semi-automation features, just two more examples of what can be useful. So you can also create board buttons or card buttons that will trigger a set of actions when you click them. So it's kind of a manual trigger followed by automated actions. So let's look at a board button. One board button that can be useful is a sort by date button. So let's do sort by date. And we can choose an icon here, then add an action. And we can say sort the cards in a specific list. So let's say an in by due date ascending. And we save that. And what happens is this sort by date button appears. So here, if I have cards with due dates spread out through this list, I can hit sort by date. It will give me an indicator at the bottom here, and then sort the cards by due date. And the other type of button we can create is the card button. So here we can create a button that will appear inside a card. And a good one that I find useful is if you make an I got this button. So where you'd add an action where basically the person that clicks the button joins the card, and we can add some content such as post comment, I got this one. And of course we can also add labels and all kinds of things. You know the drill by now. So this is what this looks like if we have a card here. There's an I got this button. When I click that, it assigns me and it posts this comment. All right, so those are 9 useful Trello automations that save time and add efficiency and quality to your workflows. Now think about any kind of task that you repeatedly do, either yourself or that people in your team repeatedly do, and think about how to automate those in Trello. Because if it's something that happens on a recurring basis, it can probably be done within these features. Which one of these workflow automations did you find most useful? Which one of these can you actually take and apply for yourself or your team? Let me know by leaving a comment below. And also, if you have built some badass workflow automations yourself, share them with us by leaving a comment below.